Welcome back to yet another episode of the Sports Beat with Richard Holdridge, presented by Georgia Alabama Sports Live. I'm your host, Richard Holdridge, and on this special edition of the Sports Beat, I'm going to talk about the NCAA tournament as we are about a month away from the first round of March Madness. And I know that I get excited about college basketball because I love college basketball. I live in the state of Georgia. And it got me thinking, why aren't the teams in Georgia having more success in the NCAA tournament? So I compiled a list, and I got a bunch of notes here as we've had some memorable moments in the NCAA tournament, especially for these teams in Georgia. So I've come up with a list. This is the top 10 moments in NCAA tournament and conference tournament play in the state of Georgia. And so I'm excited about this list. Unfortunately, right now, I don't think any of the teams in Georgia are going to make the NCAA tournament this year. You got Georgia. They started out 12-3. Right now, they are 14-10. Not looking really good. They're starting to reel, and the SEC is up this year. I mean, we all know how good the SEC is. They might even get 9 teams in this NCAA tournament. Georgia Tech, well, they started 8-3. Once they got into ACC play, it's Coach Damian Stoudemire's first season. They did have very good wins against Duke and North Carolina, but still not at the level where they want to be, especially under Bobby Crimmins in the 1980s and the 1990s when they just had that incredible run. And then Georgia State, I mean, they're not as good as they have been. They've made the NCAA tournament a couple of times in the last 10 years. And also Mercer, a team that is, I don't think that they're looking like they're going to be an NCAA tournament team. And then Kennesaw State, when they lost their coach Amir Abdul-Rahim, who's doing just a great job at South Florida. I think South Florida can make the NCAA tournament this year. They've kind of fallen off a little bit. I still think if they can get hot in the tournament for the Atlantic Sun. Remember, this is their final year in the Atlantic Sun. That maybe they can go back-to-back and they can make the NCAA tournament. I think that it's going to take some time. Kennesaw State is really a hotbed for basketball. I mean, we saw what happened in the Marietta area with Joseph Wheeler winning a state title. Kell wins a state title for both the boys and girls. So that North Metro Atlanta area has really been a hotbed for basketball. You've seen Isaiah Collier see success at USC. And so I'm going to go ahead and put up this list. And I really played around with this. I wanted to come up with this list. This is my top 10 greatest moments in NCAA tournament history in the state of Georgia. Let's start with number 10. So number 10, this Georgia Bulldogs team led by their head coach Tubby Smith. They just came out of nowhere. I mean, if you remember the player, Shandon Anderson was a great player. I mean, this is what they did. They were a number 8 seed, and they upset Clemson. They upset Purdue, but unfortunately they did lose to Syracuse 83-81 in the Sweet 16. This catapulted Tubby Smith to get the Kentucky job. And I know that Georgia has fallen on some hard times when it comes to basketball. They did get Jim Herrick in the early 2000s, but we all know about the scandal, and we know about the fallout from Georgia basketball, and I don't think they have recovered since then. So number 10, I got the 1996 Georgia Bulldogs making it to the Sweet 16. Remember, that team that they beat in the second round, that Purdue team had Brad Miller. They were a very good team. Guys like Pertha Robinson. Georgia at number 10. All right, number 9. I had fun with this because this was a team that I thought could win it all. The 1985 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets team. You remember that team with Mark Price and John Sally. This was one of Bobby Crimmins' best teams. This 1985 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets team, they were a number 2 seed. Now, they beat Mercer. Mercer was led by Sam Mitchell. Mercer was just happy to be in the tournament. And you look at what Georgia Tech did. I mean, 65-58 over Mercer. They beat Syracuse. They beat Illinois. Illinois was number 3 seed. They were 27-8 that year, and they did lose to the eventual NCAA champions, Georgetown. Those Georgetown Hoyas led by Patrick Ewing. The Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets making it all the way to the Elite Eight. It really set up for a nice run where they were a number 2 seed in 86, and they made it to the Sweet 16. But that 86 Georgia Tech team did not make my list because I could only put 10 teams on this list. All right, number 8, the Kennesaw State Owls, led by their head coach, Amir Abdul-Rahim, making it to the NCAA tournament. I talked to my friends up in the North Metro Atlanta area. I used to live in Kennesaw. We lived about 5 minutes from the Convocation Center. I've been to games. I went to the game in 2010 where they upset Georgia Tech at their home court. It was the biggest win in Kennesaw State history. They've fallen on hard times. They went through some coaches. After the late Tony Ingle, they had Al Skinner. They had Lewis Preston. They get Amir Abdul-Rahim. In his first season, he only wins 1 game, but he quickly turned it around. And you have players like Chris Youngblood and Terrell Durden, and they beat that Liberty team in the ASUN championship. And the fan base in Kennesaw really rallied around the Kennesaw State Owls. And then I got excited. Even though they were a number 14 seed, they were taking on the number 3 team, Xavier, and they were up by 11 in this game. I seriously thought the Kennesaw State Owls are going to make an upset in the first round of the NCAA tournament. It really put Kennesaw State on the map, and North Metro Atlanta area was buzzing come tournament time, and that's why I have them at number 8 on this list. All right, let's have a little fun now. Number 7, the 2015 Georgia State Panthers. I got to tell you, when this was happening in real time, could have been one of the greatest moments in Atlanta sports history. R.J. Hunter hits a huge 3. By the way, Georgia State, they were a number 14 seed. They were taking on the number 3 seeded Baylor Bears. R.J. Hunter hits a big 3. His dad and coach, Ron Hunter, who, he had surgery, so he actually had to sit in a chair because, he did have surgery. He falls off his chair. I mean, it's a great moment in Georgia State history, and I got that at number 7. All right, number 6. If y'all remember, we're actually approaching the 10-year anniversary of probably one of the biggest upsets in NCAA tournament history. Definitely in the state of Georgia. The Mercer Bears, led by their coach Bob Hoffman, went 29-5 in the regular season. Mercer, led by Langston Hall, upset a Duke Blue Devils team that had Jabari Smith Jr. Jabari Parker. Oh man, I was trying to get that name across. Who went on to play for the Bucks. Duke would go on to win the NCAA tournament in 2015, but it was that loss against Mercer in 2014 that really put Mercer on the map. And I can't deny or confirm that there was a parade in Macon, but I know that people that were in Macon, I talked to Marvin James, who is a sports reporter there in Macon. It was a big deal. This really had Macon buzzing, and this was the biggest news story when it came to sports down in Macon. Number 6, the Mercer Bears upsetting Duke in the first round of the NCAA tournament. They were a number 14 seed. At the time, Mercer was in the Atlantic Sun Conference, and just excited that they even got to be in the tournament. This was really a great moment for the Mercer Bears. And it was their second tournament appearance since the Sam Mitchell team back in 1985. Number 5, the 2001 Georgia State Panthers, led by legendary coach Lefty Driesell. Now, Lefty Driesell coached at Maryland. During his second stint and in the twilight of his coaching career, he decides to coach a Georgia State Panthers team that was a number 11 seed. And at this moment, Georgia schools have not had any success in the NCAA tournament. You've had some with Georgia and Georgia Tech. So this really put Georgia State, it put the whole NCAA on notice. when they defeated Wisconsin in that first round. They get to the second round. Lefty Driesell is taking on his former team, the Maryland Terrapins, led by Gary Williams. And they lose in the second round. That Maryland team would go on to win the NCAA tournament the following year. But really, what a great moment for Georgia State. And you know, when you think about great Georgia State teams, they upset Wisconsin by 50-49. They had guys like Sherrard Long and Thomas Terrell. Just such a great team. And I got Georgia State at number 5. Now we get into the top 4 on this list. It's nationally known. Everybody knows about the story of these teams. The next team, now they didn't have success in the NCAA tournament, but they had such an incredible run in 2008, and it was such a great story. You know, it was a tragedy, but it was turned into a good feel-good story. I'm talking about the 2008 Georgia Bulldogs, who were going into the SEC tournament, only have won 4 games all year. There was a tornado in downtown Atlanta that ripped a hole in the roof of the Georgia Dome, and they had a documentary called SEC Storied about this. There was a game that went into overtime. In fact, the documentary is called Miracle 3. If it wasn't for that three-pointer, the fans would have piled out of the Georgia Dome, and who knows what could have happened. It was just a tragic event, but the loss of life was spared because of this Miracle 3. Anyway, Georgia ended up beating Ole Miss in overtime that night, 97-95. They had to play Kentucky the next day. That game got postponed. They were trying to find a venue to play the SEC championship. There's even talks about them canceling this and just giving the winner to Tennessee because they were the top seed. But they decide to play the games in Alexander Memorial Coliseum. So Georgia had to play on their enemy's home court, which did not look good at all for Georgia to be playing at Georgia Tech. But Georgia Tech was hospitable. They opened their doors to the Georgia Bulldogs and to all the SEC schools. Georgia had to play 2 games in one day. That was a challenge in itself. I mean, this was a team led by their head coach, Dennis Felton. Remember, they only won 4 games going into the NCAA tournament. They had NBA player Sonadia Gaines. They had Terrence Woodbury. Zach Swansea was a freshman. He hit some big shots in these tournament games. They were able to beat Kentucky. They turn around and they beat Mississippi State. And then on Sunday, beating Arkansas. And I remember Vern Lundquist on the broadcast saying, we've got Georgia on our mind. Georgia does the improbable, winning 4 games in 3 days and making it to the NCAA tournament as they were the worst team in the SEC. And this really goes to show anything can happen when it comes to region tournament time and conference tournament time, as the Georgia Bulldogs were awarded the 14th seed. They did lose to Xavier in the first round of the NCAA tournament, but it was a good story. And that's why I have them on this list at number 4. All right, number 3. Now we're going to really get into some teams that could have won the championship. Lethal Weapon 3, the 1990 Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Lethal Weapon 3, all 3 players averaged more than 20 points a game. You had Dennis Scott, Brian Oliver, and Kenny Anderson. Dennis Scott was really the top scorer for Bobby Crimmins and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. I mean, at this point, Georgia Tech is making the NCAA tournament every year. You saw them make the Elite Eight in 85. They go to the Sweet 16 in 86. They have got just amazing players at this time. They are known as Point Guard U. And this Georgia Tech team, they were a number 4 seed. They get the huge 81-80 victory over Michigan State. And their time would come to an end when in the Final Four, they lose to the eventual champion UNLV Running Rebels. You got to remember, I had no ties to Georgia. I was a kid who grew up rooting for UNLV. I love those UNLV Running Rebels teams. I was happy that UNLV did win a championship, but a little sad for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets later in life because that was a team that I think could have won if they only lost UNLV by 9 points. If they would have got past UNLV, I think they'd get past Duke. I honestly think that Georgia Tech could have beat that Duke team that really wasn't ready to be in the championship. I mean, the Christian Laettner, Bobby Hurley, Grant Hill wasn't even on the team because he was a freshman in '91. So it was really led by freshman Bobby Hurley, sophomore Christian Laettner. Laettner would go on to win 2 more championships in '91 and '92. So that's neither here or there. We're talking about Georgia here on this list. So, all right, number 3. I already talked about that. Georgia Tech in the Final Four. Number 2, the 1983 Georgia Bulldogs. Hugh Durham was a legendary coach for the Georgia Bulldogs. They already saw success with the Georgia Lady Bulldogs with Teresa Edwards, making it to multiple Final Fours. I mean, if you are a student on the campus of Georgia in the early 1980s, life was good. Just ask DJ Jones, who went to 3 straight SEC championships for football, won a national championship in 1980. He was also on the campus when the basketball team made it to the Final Four. Now, this was the year after Dominique Wilkins. Dominique goes to the NBA in 1982. The 83 Georgia Bulldogs got a huge upset over Michael Jordan, Sam Perkins, in the Elite Eight against the North Carolina Tar Heels, 82-77. This Georgia team was led by future NBA player Vern Fleming, who was a pick in the '84 draft in the first round. He would later go on and have an incredible career with the Indiana Pacers. The late Terry Fair, who's from Macon, I made sure to give him a shout out on the broadcast, coming from Southwest High School down in Macon, Georgia. Just a legendary player. And then you have just great team players like you have... I lost my train of thought. Anyway, we're talking about Terry Fair and Vern Fleming on that 1990 Georgia Tech team. Oh, James Banks. Man, I got it in my notes. All right. Georgia would end up losing in the Final Four to Jim Valvano's North Carolina State Wolfpack. That was a team, the ESPN 30 for 30 Survive and Advance. They would go on to defeat Phi Slamma Jamma. You got to remember, Georgia was a number 4 seed, and they ended up beating North Carolina, a number 1 seed, would lose to NC State, who was a number 6 seed. I mean, I guess you could say that Georgia would be the favorite going into that Final Four. I mean, both were having Cinderella seasons. NC State would end up beating Georgia 67-60, but they would end up go on to beat Phi Slamma Jamma. I mean, who knows? If Georgia would have got past NC State, do they have a chance against Phi Slamma Jamma? I mean, it was just great that Georgia, who's considered a football school, was in the Final Four. I mean, that was incredible for Georgia basketball during that time. All right, the number 1 greatest moments in NCAA tournament history. I have to bring it up because it is recent. This is the 20th anniversary of that Georgia Tech team that made it to the championship game. An incredible run to the championship game. That team led by Coach Paul Hewitt, who took over for Bobby Crimmins. A lot of people thought that Georgia Tech would fall off, but it seemed like they just kept getting players into the NBA, and you saw it in the later years, especially getting players like Chris Bosh and Derek Favors, Javaris Crittenton, Thaddeus Young, Amont Shumpert. I mean, they had a lot of great players in the NBA, even in the early 2000s. But this Georgia Tech team was a number 3 seed. I think they kind of caught a break when they ended up playing Nevada, who was a number 10 seed. But they were able to beat Kansas in the Final Four against a team led by John Lucas. They got the tip in against Oklahoma State 67-65. Will Bynum with the tip in, one of the greatest moments in Georgia sports history. And then let's talk about the championship game. Did Georgia Tech really have a chance to beat a UConn Huskies team who was built to win a championship that year? I'm talking a team that was stacked with Emeka Okafor, Ben Gordon. You also had Charlie Villanueva, Daniel Boone. They had just a very stacked team. I like this Georgia Tech team, but they didn't have size. I mean, they had a lot of good guard play with B.J. Elder, Jarrett Jack, and Will Bynum. But that is my list. I really worked hard on this list. I mean, some honorable mentions that did not make the list. Obviously, you look at the 86 Georgia Tech team that went to the Sweet 16. I mean, it's hard to put a Georgia Tech Sweet 16 team on here when we got a couple of Final Four teams. We got an Elite Eight team. And then the 1985 Mercer Bears, led by Sam Mitchell. They were a number 15 seed that made it into the tournament by legendary coach Bill Bibb. That was a team that, they got into the tournament. They were just happy to be there, but they did lose to Georgia Tech that would later go on and play in the Elite Eight. Well, I hope you enjoyed my list. I'm excited about college basketball. We're about a month away from the first round of the NCAA tournament. And I'm just feeling bad that I don't think there's going to be any Georgia teams that are going to make the NCAA tournament this year. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you all have a great rest of your day. And I'm out of here. Bye.